goal of this conference was to look at the nexus between energy, distribution, and finance. And what we believe, as Pam said, is it's actually really important to have the right technology for poor people. It's really important to have financing mechanisms, both for the end user, as well as for the energy enterprises, as well as for the people who are financing the energy enterprises. And it's really important to be able to get those products to the poor people that need them. So throughout the day, we'll end up talking about those themes. On this panel, we're going to focus on the finance and investment question. And so what I'd like to do is start, first of all, with Willem from SolarNow, which is a social enterprise set up in Uganda. And Willem, maybe you can start by telling everyone just a little bit about SolarNow and explain the history of evolving from a not-for-profit to a for-profit structure and how the way you thought about access to capital shifted in that change and the kinds of capital that you ended up raising to the point that you're at now.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, so a little bit about our history is we started this activity back in 2006 with an NGO called Rural Energy Foundation. And Rural Energy Foundation was really a training institution. We trained up-country dealers in 8 countries in Africa on how to sell, install solar energy. I mean, if you look at the distribution of solar systems in Africa till recently, it was limited to big importers in capitals of countries, but there was no up-country distribution. So people were left alone to install the systems themselves, and there it often went wrong, without any warranties, without any end-user finance facilities, without any installation skills and user trainings. So we did that, and it was actually quite successful. We trained around 800 dealers. Often also we changed small dealers in electronic goods into solar dealers. So they didn't only focus on the urban area where they were, but also on the surrounding off-grid areas. However, in 2010, when we actually had a very successful year, we won the Ashden Awards in London, and the EU gave us an award, we decided to do away with the whole activity. Because we knew that in the end, training alone is not enough. You need to do something on the finance side. Because people, it's not like people need money to buy decent quality. So with limited money, they can only buy inferior quality. And that's what you see in most countries in Africa, unfortunately, happening. People buy inferior quality because they don't have enough money. Therefore, they end up being dissatisfied. They tell their neighbors, and the neighbors don't come. So that's why in an average African village, you see only one system, if you already see a solar system at all. So we knew that when we want to do something about it, we need to do something on the finance side. Now, back in 2009 and 2010, we have tried to link those dealers with microfinance institutions, and that to a large extent failed. Why? The microfinance institutions, they found those farmers too far away, high transaction cost. They were afraid of, the seasonal cash flow of those farmers, and also they didn't trust solar, because solar has a very bad reputation in most of those countries. So in 2010, we tried to do it ourselves, and of course, immediately we realized, well, if we are to do this ourselves, we cannot do that as an NGO. So in early 2011, when we saw there was a huge demand for it, we turned ourselves into a company called SolarNow. Now, what we learned was very interesting. Actually, we thought, we need to make it affordable. That's why we give a credit to our clients. And but we noticed that many clients, although they had the money, they still wanted the credit, because they also saw the credit as being a kind of guarantee. You're not going to cheat me if you give me your product on credit, right? So that's why I think in our company, we cannot afford to compromise on quality, because immediately we will shoot ourselves in our own feet, because a client that is not satisfied with the quality won't pay us. So in that sense, you know, quality and end user finance in one hand sounds very complex. Why are you doing that yourself, you know? I would prefer not to do it ourselves. But the beauty of it is that because you have it all in one company, you cannot compromise on quality. And I think that's what we've learned over the last 4 years since we are doing this. I mean, by maintaining high quality levels, you know, people are paying, and by offering financial, you know, an 18-month pay plan, you know, our clients pay 20% up front and 80% they pay in 18 installments. Yeah, the clients like it and they can really afford good quality also. Does that answer your question, Nikki?
It does, but tell us a little bit about the money that came in to grow the company and how that, the kind of the profile of the investors that were attracted to you in the very beginning and how that shifted over time, and also how some of the investors stayed loyal during the entire period and have reinvested. So just tell us a little bit about the investment history of SolarNow, the asset finance company.
Okay, so not one of my favorite subjects, because if I would have known how cash constrained we would have been over the past 3-4 years, probably would not have started this adventure at all. Anyhow, so doing the credit ourselves is of course, you know, something I really love, but you need a lot of money for it. The more we sell, the more money we need. Very simple. And so initially we got a grant to set up the company, which basically covered expatriate salaries, some of the flights, etc. But we had a strong belief, well, if we're going to do this, we need to make it completely financially sustainable. So in 2012, we have not had any grant funding except from this woman here for our IT system. But you know, we've seen that being cash constrained is not only limiting growth, it is super expensive. And we have been chronically cash constrained, and we've been super lucky to find investors in different stages of our growth path that were coming in. So initially, after the grant funding basically had ended, we got soft loans from institutions like AECF in Nairobi, you know, and also some commercial loans, because a soft loan, based on soft loan, you can attract commercial loan funding. And then back in early 2013, we were doing our first equity raise. So also at that time, you know, we had still limited track record, but we were super lucky to find an investor who appreciated the risk and who's been with us since then. We are now on the verge of announcing a new equity raise later this month, which will really give us the meat on the bone, basically, to expand to the next phase. And I think if you look at, if I look back right now, and of course I would do some things different with SolarNow, and the most important thing I would do different is start much smaller. So we've been always pushed by ambitions, by also investors, by the way, who said, you know, you have to sell more, you have to sell more. But if we would have chosen at a certain point in time, you know, let's do a little bit less, then we would not have been, you know, cash constrained so much. And we would also have actually been in a better position on the P&L side. Now, one other breakthrough that we booked last year is that we got bank loan, also through a guarantee from USAID, which we're very grateful for, with interventions or intermediation from ARC Finance. Having a bank loan was great. It came at the right time. It also proved to investors outside the country, you know, you have a bank loan. So why would I not come? You know, we having impact funding, and you already got a bank loan anyway. So you know, it's a vote of confidence. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's a bit tricky. I mean, what we've also learned is that at different stages of growth, it's not about getting funding. Now, it's getting the right type of funding, and having an installment-based loan to a bank in a period where you're growing fast is also a risk, because you have to pay your monthly installment in a period where you also want to grow. So basically, you have to repay that installment with funding, you know, from other sources. And the bank is not as, as flexible as an impact investor. They just want to see their installment, full stop, else they enforce their collateral. So that's one of the lessons we also learned. It's great to have a bank loan, but you have to be also very careful that you have to understand the implications, basically, of it.
And just one final question, and we can come back for more later. But in terms of the investors that have come on board, what do you think was the thing from your perspective that was most attractive about you or most enchanting about you that made them actually fork over the cash, as an investor, provide the investment side? So from your side, and then we'll talk to some of the investors later on, to see whether the perception ends up sort of matching up. But I'd love to know your view on what you think made SolarNow attractive, or what they said to you at least, that made you attractive to them as an investment.
So, we're not a technology company. We just buy what is off the shelf available in China. We don't everyone can do it. Also the credit, everyone can basically do it if you hire some people from the microfinance side. I think what attracted investors most so far is the fact that we have been able to cope with the difficult challenges, to make the right decisions at difficult times. We've made many mistakes as a company, really many mistakes. Although mistakes is maybe not the right word. There were just lessons we needed to learn. But every time I think we've been able to prove to ourselves that we were flexible enough to come to that solution. And I think that's all the time the consistent answer we got from investors when we asked them, why do you like us? Or, it's really, well, you've shown now over 4 years that you've been able to cope with difficult situations as a team, showing creativity and that there's a good team in place, basically. And that gives us the confidence. It's not really about your technology, about where you are, about the market. That's all fine, but it's really about the team. Having said that, your question could also have been, why hasn't it taken you so long to get funding? So then I would have given you probably another answer, but that question I would also have understood.
Well, from ARC's perspective, and as you say, we're very implicated in every way, in fact, in any of the funding that's been provided through USAID. What was very attractive to us about you guys, I have to say, is that there are very few energy companies that I have come across that really understand the credit component well. And if you read Willem's bio, you'll see he actually does have a very robust microfinance background, having started a microfinance bank and also having been on the investment side. So, his pedigree from a finance point of view is really compelling. And for me, that meant, even though this was a new company and it was doing something that was unusual, there were hardly any other asset finance companies doing this kind of thing, except perhaps for the people in Bangladesh, where Deepal actually pioneered all of that. Really, SolarNow, I think, had a very compelling story to say. So for us, that was very attractive. But anyway, we'll hear from some of the others in a little while. I'm going to move now to Jacob, who is here wearing two different hats. Jacob is one of the founders of Simpa Networks, and he also works with Investor Development, which is an early stage investor. And so Jacob, I'd love you to trace the whole, kind of like your whole history, going back to the very beginning with Simpa Networks, and tell us about the process of raising money in that very early period with Simpa. And Simpa's now gone through 2 rounds. So Jacob's one of the co-founders of Simpa. You've gone now through 2 rounds of investment very successfully. You're poised to, or have actually raised, a substantial amount of debt from OPIC. And I think it would be very interesting for people to hear what that process was like, and what were the scary moments, as you were going along, where you just thought, oh my God, there is nothing below me right now, from a finance point of view.
Thanks, Nikki. Great questions. So I came to, well, I started off actually working with with Winiecki as one of the early team members at ARC Finance, and so spent a lot of time working with and trying to work with microfinance institutions to lend for energy, and had some successes, a lot of challenges, and with a couple of other guys that ended up becoming the other co-founders of Simpa, we started toying around with the idea of figuring out how to sell solar in a similar way to how cell phones are sold. And you know, I think we started to touch upon an idea that we thought had potential, and a lot of it was really, you know, based on things we had seen in other regions with prepaid metering being used for grid electricity. And we'd come to I would sort of call it the concept stage or chapter 1 of the company, where we sort of started to wind down other things we were working on. So our individual income streams sort of stopped, and we're putting in a lot of time and sort of opportunity cost in thinking through this idea. And we knew we were sort of onto something, but we had not validated the idea with customers. We didn't have an actual prototype of the technology, and we needed to find an investor, a partner that could buy into the concept, and not just provide us a little bit of capital to go out and manufacture prototypes and take them out to customers and validate that they can be used, it is attractive, et cetera, but also to be kind of a third-party validation of the concept, and that's how we, of course, pitched ARC Finance, and we gratefully received a convertible loan from ARC Finance, and that was our seed investment. And at that stage, we didn't have an established business that could be generating income off of other activities. It was a new concept, really difficult to find small amounts of capital, talking about like $20,000, $40,000, $50,000. It's really hard to find that, especially if you're trying something new, I think. I think at this point, if you were trying to do, like in 2014, a pay-as-you-go solar business, you probably could raise that $50,000 a little bit easier, but a lot of what we were doing then was explaining the concept, and over and over again, explaining the concept and trying to get, drawing the analogy to cell phones and talking about the differences between solar and cell phones. It's not exactly the same, but trying to get people interested, and it was tough. It was really tough, and we definitely got to a point where we were like, okay, I need to go like work at a bike store or something like this pretty soon.
I'm glad we saved you from the bike store, Jacob.
Right, and so we did get this initial amount of funding from ARC Finance, and like I said, it was not just it gave us the ability to design and manufacture prototypes, to take those to India, to start to do pilots with actual customers, to actually collect cash from customers, to get that customer validation. But as I said, it was also a validation of the concept because of ARC Finance's experience and expertise. It was validation of the concept, that there's an organization that's going to say, yes, I do believe in this, and that also was really helpful to us when we went out. That initial funding helped us sort of prove the concept, and then after that, what we needed to do was actually prove it with customers. And to do that, I don't know if you wanted me to get into like the Series A piece.
Yeah, why don't you? I think it's an interesting story. If you can sort of talk about the difference between Series A and Series B from your side, because I think these stories are actually really helpful for people. They end up being private stories that aren't always necessarily told, and there are different pain points and different sort of points of celebration, during that process.
Sure, okay. So I think, so we went out to try and raise, what we knew we needed to do was we needed to build out a customer value proposition and test it with, we thought maybe 400, 500 customers. Like that's what we knew we needed to raise money for. We needed to raise money to manufacture those products, to start to build a team in India. We needed enough funding so that the co-founders could relocate from the US and Canada to India. And so we had a decent sense of what we wanted to achieve, and we went out to raise equity. And I mean, we faced a ton of challenges. Like I said, this was when there was only one other group of people that we knew of that was also talking about pay-as-you-go solar at about the same time. And I think both groups were kind of educating investors, educating donors at that time about the concept and getting people interested. And so we probably talked to, I mean, at this point, if I was trying to raise money right now, I don't imagine I would have to speak to as many investors as we had to then. You know, we probably got a no response from maybe 80 investors or something like that. And you know, we also were pursuing traditional VCs as well. We were pursuing, you know, in Silicon Valley, clean tech investors at the same time. And the process at that point, what we were really being evaluated on, I think, was obviously the team, but I think investors were also trying to understand the concept and trying to think about how, a lot of feedback we got was, why don't you work with microfinance institutions? Like, what's wrong with that? Why don't you do what's being done in Bangladesh? And trying to explain, like, well, this is the difference between India and Bangladesh when it comes to that. And it was a lot of, it was a really long process. It took a long time, and that initial investment from ARC Finance, you know, was used up pretty quickly, I would say. And I think we were, one other challenge we had was with impact investors. There was, at that point, we were being asked, you know, you need to demonstrate to us your model for scaling. And there was a lot of interesting discussion around that when honestly, we didn't know how to do that at that time, you know, and we would even say that, you know, that we don't actually know. What we know how to do is we know how to get from here to the next round of funding, and we know the steps we're going to take to progressively de-risk the business and get to the point where we can build out a scalable model, but we actually don't know how to scale right now, and it's a new concept that needs to be validated. And you know, there are, I think, very different definitions of scale between investors and definitions of impact that, you know, you're having to juggle, and in each conversation trying to, like, what do they care about? So let's sort of, you know, make sure we pitch that when we're talking to them, and that's tough to do. You know, it's a long, difficult process. We ended up finding, you know, an initial investor, which I actually work for now, Invested Development. We had good conversations with them. They were very interested in the concept. They liked the technology piece, but you know, they didn't want to be the only investor. And that was another challenge, is, you know, and I think that's quite natural. Investors don't typically want to be the only investor. And what we ended up coming to was an agreement that they would give us a commitment letter, you know, that said, we'll invest conditional upon you bringing in other investors to a certain amount. And that was a huge help, huge help. I mean, that was critical, because we could then go back to, you know, the dozen or so investors that we considered being hot, you know, on our list of investors, and try to get some of them off of the fence.
That's great. And you know, I think one of the things, apart from the fact that for those of you who don't know Simpa well, the pay-as-you-go technology is actually a very, very interesting technology, and the particular product that Simpa has, I think, is a very interesting product. I think one of the things that you were able to do, which was a challenge to some other institutions, is to actually get a major donor, in this case, the Asian Development Bank, to actually put in a quite large equity investment early on. And that, I think, made a big, big difference for you, because I think it bought you time to be able to kind of play with the model, to actually get it to the point where you could actually have a scale conversation that was an authentic conversation, as opposed to, I hope, you know, cross my fingers, you know, will it actually turn out that way? And so, and that was an unusual investment for the Asian Development Bank. It was the first time I think they had done that. So can you just talk a little bit about that process? And, you know, I spoke to the people during the due diligence process at the Asian Development Bank, and I've spoken to Jiwon and his team since then. And they really viewed the investment in you guys as a kind of a test, which, if it were to be successful, would open the doors for a whole set of other investments. So, you know, the kind of the world's hoping you succeed, because that will open up a flood of funding, hopefully from the Asian Development Bank of a similar type. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Jacob, too.
Sure, sure. So that, I guess, if starting in the company was like chapter 1, and then, you know, validating the concept with like 500 customers, like chapter 2. So chapter 3 was, you know, we had felt somewhat satisfied in iterating the customer value proposition with, you know, 400 or 500 customers. We were at the point where, you know, now we needed to figure out a model for acquiring and servicing customers at a larger scale. And that's what we really needed to go out and raise money for. And it's interesting, when we had the first meeting with Asian Development Bank, I wasn't in that meeting, but one of the other co-founders, you know, told me, there's maybe potential with Asian Development Bank, and I actually said, no way, there's no possible way. That's not, I will give you, you know, and actually, I had to buy him an iPhone because the investment came through because we made a bet. But I mean, at that point, you know, investors are really looking for market validation. You know, they want to actually go out, meet customers. They want to actually see that not only have you sold those products to customers, but they're satisfied with it, that there's demand, and they're really starting to judge you based on that. And because it's also essentially a credit product, you know, they're also paying very close attention to how you handle that function. And Willem and I were talking about this beforehand. You know, it's the technology, the payment enforcement technology and mobile payments, et cetera, they're helpful, but they don't eliminate the need to have a very solid credit function within the organization. And I'll also borrow language from Willem that we made a lot of mistakes. Maybe I'll talk about them as lessons learned as well, but we made a lot of mistakes for sure in those, you know, first couple of years. And looking back, I would have loved to have avoided all of them, but, you know, they were necessary, I think, to understand how much of the value chain we needed to, like, have control over. And you know, we were at the point where we had existing investors. We had some interest, you know, from some investors that were, I would consider, on the fence. And I think one of the things that was really helpful for us in raising that funding is we actually ended up getting approved for USAID DIV, Development Innovation Ventures funding. And that was, I would say, very catalytic, because the whole proposal that we put forward was around building that sales and distribution model and staffing up for that, and, you know, basically funding to play around and do experiments with how you incentivize agents and things like that. And that, to a certain extent, I think, started to de-risk the investment at that round for players like Asian Development Bank. But one of the things that came up quite a lot in, I think, both the Series A and Series B for Simpa for investors is when you're rolling out a model that has a credit component, they want to know how you're going to raise that $3, $5, $10 million down the line. Are there other investors that actually do this right now? Are there examples that we can point to and say, oh, this other company has actually done something similar and they've raised $10 million. And so I have some comfort that that's out there and that that's been done. And that wasn't there, actually, when we were raising that round. And I think it's a little bit better now. Like, if I was starting that pay-as-you-go company now, you can point to maybe some of the bigger rounds of funding that have happened in the last couple of years, but that just wasn't there. And so we had to draw comparisons to, like, Bangladesh, or we had to say, like, this has happened before. And I think with Asian Development Bank, it was a really good, really lucky timing, I would say, for us, because you know, there was a particular investment officer who was really passionate about figuring out how to get the Asian Development Bank to you know, invest in these kind of businesses. There's a specific time window in which he had to really try and push this through, and like you said, he he wanted to do something that they could hold as both a demonstration of how the deal was structured, but also the process. You know, I think that a lot of the feedback that he got internally, and I think you'll probably hear this at groups like IFC as well, when they want to invest in like these energy access businesses, it's hard for them to do something that's small, a deal that's small. It's hard to do something that's early stage. And for him, it was trying to figure out a process that was fast and that was low cost and that he could then take internally and say, this is how we can do it. Like, this is an example of how it can be done. And so I think we definitely worked really hard to make that process fast and easy for them. And, you know, I would say we put a lot more attention to that than we had in the past, just because we knew it was this special situation that we really needed to, you know, drop everything, respond immediately as quickly as possible. Because if not, then not only will Asian Development Bank not come through on this investment to us, there's the potential that they won't be able to invest in these kind of businesses in the future.
Yeah, I think in the breaks you can maybe talk to people about OPIC and some of the other cool things that have happened recently. But very quickly, you now actually have two other hats. You have the hat of working with investor development, which was one of your earliest investors. I think they came in right after us, and actually also invested in SolarNow. So there's an interesting sort of story there. And you also wear the hat of CGAP's kind of pay-as-you-go guru, which people can also talk to Jacob about later on in the break. But in terms of investor development has always, in my view, along with Acumen, along with ERM, some of these other early stage investors, I think it's played a really important role in noticing and calling out and nurturing some really promising companies that would otherwise not be able to move things forward. And I should say Deutsche Bank as well. We'll come to you in a minute, Moya. But can you just talk a little bit about investor development's philosophy for those people here who don't know investor development?
Sure. So investor development is an impact investor that's based in Boston. I'm one of 3 people that are not based in Boston. And the focus is early stage financing, primarily equity for technology startups in renewable energy, agriculture, and mobile/ICT sectors. We've made 5 investments in the energy sector. Simpa is one, SolarNow is another one, a couple more in sub-Saharan Africa. And you know, a big part of what I really liked so maybe I'll just first talk about like from the Simpa perspective. Like at that point, when we were raising the first round of funding, I would say there weren't a lot of impact investors that really understood technology really well. You know, and specifically how a component of like an overall energy system could make a difference. You know, something like a prepaid metering technology or a software platform, like how that you could build a business around that and how you can actually impact the value chain, you know, in the energy access sector. Not a lot of investors, I think, pay close attention to that. I think it's what's more attractive typically is like companies that are distributing a product or, you know, manufacturing a product and getting it out to customers. It's more concrete and easier to sort of look at that customer as your customer rather than, you know, you're sort of 3 steps removed from that customer. So they really kind of got that, and I see that a lot in how we're evaluating businesses now. You know, and investor development very much looks at the entire value chain. I would say it has a pretty strong lean in the energy sector towards solar PV, though we wouldn't, you know, completely turn down another energy technology, but solar PV is very attractive. And, you know, with Simpa, with SolarNow, with some of the other investments, you know, it's really been, as an investor, it's been really about figuring out how that particular investment might impact other regions. And that's, I think, what was interesting about the conversations we had with invested development when I was at Simpa was that they were already thinking about applications in other regions and synergies with other companies in their portfolio or other companies that they were considering at the time. And I think that was a bit different from some of the other investors we were speaking to sort of at the time. And another thing that was really helpful for us, like I mentioned before, at the point in which they came in, the conversation was not really about how do you scale. It was really about coming to agreement on milestones for this particular round to get you to the next stage of the business. And that, for us, was really helpful. And I don't know, maybe you can speak to this as well, but I find it like really helpful, like being on the enterprise side, having an investor that's working with you to set clear targets and milestones that are specifically related to de-risking your business and getting to the point where you can build a scalable model rather than sort of really pressuring you to hit numbers, numbers meaning numbers of customers, and so that was really helpful for us.
Thanks so much. And Moya, let me turn to you. Can you tell us about how Deutsche Bank got involved in lending and investing on the in terms of the energy space? I've actually known Gary Hatton for years and years in terms of his microfinance work, and he and I were on a panel together, Solar for All. I think, Deepal, you were also one of the judges, and Deutsche Bank put up the prize, which was, I think, 250,000, which went to Greenlight Planet. I think we have Radhika here in the audience somewhere. And that was my first knowledge of Deutsche Bank's involvement. And I was so excited to see that Gary had, made this step from microfinance to solar. And I wasn't sure if that was just a toe in the water or whether that was the beginning or it had preceded, there were other things that preceded it. So if you can tell the story of how it started, either from there or some other point, up to now, where you actually have two quite robust funds that have an energy focus.
Sure. I work in the Global Social Finance Group, which does impact investing at Deutsche Bank. And we have traditionally been a microfinance outfit, so going back to 1997. And about 5 years ago, in line with the Greenlight Planet experience, we decided to expand our definition of poverty. So up until that point, we had been focusing on poverty alleviation through our funds, and it was really focused on economic poverty. We wanted to, I think most people in this room will acknowledge that microfinance doesn't solve all. And we really wanted to create, look at investments that, from a business perspective, that could alleviate other kinds of poverty. And so we've, over the last 5 years, we've done a number of investments in a number of different sectors. Energy is one of them, but also housing, education, and health. And we think at this moment that the energy sector is the one that has the most potential for growth in the coming years. So we have a new fund that we're launching that will be where it's a more commercial fund, where we'll probably have 6 to 10 energy investments in it. So it is a pretty good commitment. From starting with the Greenlight Planet, we actually have additional funds that we call more philanthropic. And so those are the ones that we can use to really develop ideas and sectors. And so we didn't jump in and say, okay, let's take investor money and let's put it into the energy sector. We started with Greenlight Planet. We also had another couple of grants that we made into the energy sector, all in emerging markets, that covered, for example, energy efficiency in cars and vans. And we did a couple of other investments, one in Haiti, really to look at the market. We came in pretty early stage in some of these companies. So they were mostly out of a pilot phase, and we could see some traction with their sales, but not. If you looked at the model and ran the numbers, they didn't necessarily have the cash flow to support a large-scale loan. So we came in with patient capital in the form of loans that were longer term and had really better rates. This allowed us to develop our knowledge of the market. At the same time, we were really coming in and making sure that we were supporting this industry. Then about 2.5 years ago, we launched one of our more commercial funds, and in that fund, we had up to 15% in social enterprises. It was through that fund that we've made our two largest energy investments, and we also have created a more philanthropic fund in partnership with the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. This is to come in, again, at earlier stages to develop an industry. In general, we really focus on two different layers of developing an industry. One is to look at the individual underlying companies, the portfolio companies, to make sure that they're developing in a financially prudent way. Because when we come in with debt money, it's really for them to grow their working capital. So often we're finding that the equity, there's a need for equity as well as debt. And as a group, we're a debt-only shop. So that is some of the feedback that we've been giving a lot of our potential companies. In addition, we also want to show that this is an investable asset class. So we really look at developing a fund in a prudent way that allows us to turn around and say, we used patient capital, but we did it in a very smart way in order to show that there's an entire sector out here that not only we could invest in, but also others could.
Can you tell us a little tiny bit about those two investments that you made, and also what you're looking for, or what a company could say to you to make you say, okay, fine, we'll do a debt investment with you?
Sure. We have, as I said, two investments, energy investments in our more commercial funds. One of them is, and hopefully as soon as we raise the new fund, we'll be proposing immediately additional ones. Yeah. So that's definitely not the only. That's definitely not the end of it. The two investments that we have are a solar company that is a designer and manufacturer that sells throughout the world. So it's a large company located here in the US with selling in about 70 different countries, I think, but primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and the India and South and Southeast Asia. The other one is a distribution company that focuses on, again, solar, that focuses on India.
Okay, great. So you can tell other people the names. I'm trying to get the name out of you, but tell other people the names later. Thank you so much. And I just want to make sure that there's enough time for questions. So I'm going to turn to Pam. And Pam, just tell us about all the different ways. I mean, USAID supports the energy finance sector in so many different ways. Can you tell us about a few of the different instruments that, that you are personally responsible for and that the agency as a whole is involved with, that you have supported one way or another through the energy team?
So USAID is a complex organization. So I'm going to speak in generalities because we are very decentralized. And so there are a lot of different pockets of money doing a lot of different things. But generally speaking, I would say there are maybe 4 or 5 different ways in which we try to work with the sector. And so the first is to provide technical assistance. So it's not technically a form of investment. We do not take debt or equity positions in anybody. But our bread and butter is technical assistance. And that is typically provided through a company like ARC Finance, or a Winrock International. I think we have Katie here. And that can be provided to governments, to private sector companies, to NGOs. And so that we do a lot of with the goal of trying to help get the right policies and regulations in place, things like that. The other thing we do, and you've heard mentioned some of these, are kind of traditional grants. We'll put out a call for proposals. People can respond, for instance, to our development innovation ventures, and they can get funding for what it is they've proposed to do. Very traditional type of development financing. Another, I would say, new trend within USAID is providing transaction advisors. This is happening really with the larger scale, utility scale projects, especially under our Power Africa program. For those of you unfamiliar, this is a presidential initiative focusing on 6 countries in Africa. It was initially designed to electrify 20 million households. I think the president just raised it to 60 million. And so what we will do now is actually we'll put transaction advisors on the ground to help bring deals to conclusion. And this is happening on a much smaller scale, but in some of our climate change programs also. And then the last thing, I think you've heard some references to, are credit guarantees. USAID has an Office of Development Credit, which is able to provide guarantees for debt, not for equity. These are backed by the US Treasury. And we use these to try to, encourage lending, again, into new and risky spaces, and prove that these can be viable for the institutions. There are different types of guarantees. Our typical guarantee is probably a portfolio guarantee for lending to a specific sector.
And also, you have portable guarantees. I think we actually have a few players here who have some of your guarantees. I think Acumen has one of your guarantees.
We've done a number of guarantees to companies in this space. So SolarNow, we helped get a guarantee with a local bank. There's a portable guarantee to MCOPA for Acumen Fund, Orb Energy in India. So there have been a number.
Great. And Pam, this is I'm trained as a lawyer, so I'm going to now ask you a leading question, okay? Which is there anything exciting on the horizon that you'd like to tell us about?
Imagine asking this question. There is. I think, as I mentioned, we have, over the last few years, done a number of these guarantees in the space, and we were realizing several things. One is the we kept hearing over and over, like on this panel, the dire cash constraints of companies working in this sector, their need for working capital. We were also becoming a bit uncomfortable with the thought we don't want to be choosing winners. You know, we want the market to choose winners. And so we realized there's a lot of activity going on in this space. It's very exciting. We needed a more strategic approach. So I am really happy to announce I've been working with my colleagues in DCA now for over a year. We are in the final stages of a $100 million guarantee for household technologies. So this will be an 8-year, $100 million loan portfolio guarantee in partnership with Swedish SIDA, who we work with very often on our guarantees. It will be for companies manufacturing, distributing, or financing household technologies. That's a pretty broad description. We anticipate it covering 3 main areas: cook stoves and clean fuels, water and sanitation, so things like water filters, and the small-scale renewable energies, especially small solar. So it's a kind of complex structure, but the guarantee will cover 3 different funds. The Social Alpha Investment Fund, which is primarily interested in energy. The Calvert Social Investment Foundation, their fund is going to fund funders. And Signina Capital Water Infrastructure Fund. And we have Juliette Vardekor here from Signina, all the way from Zurich.
Do you want to stand up so everyone can see you?
So as you can tell from the name, they're primarily interested in the water projects, but we're really pleased to be working with these 3 funds. Can't go into a lot of detail right now, but when all of our legal documents and everything is signed, we will be announcing this and working to find ways. My job is going to be able to make sure that there's pipeline going to these funds. USAID does not influence who they decide to fund. You know, they will be analyzing companies according to their own criteria. They'll decide who to fund. But we're really excited because we're hoping this can really help move the sector as a whole forward. So this has been some time in the works. So yes, for me, this is really exciting.
It's super exciting. I think it's really exciting for the sector because any entrepreneur that I talk to, any microfinance institution or asset finance institution that I talk to in the energy space says that funding is a constraint. And it doesn't matter what stage of development, whether it's a startup that can't get that first 40,000 after friends and family won't talk to them anymore, you know, or whether it's a much more developed company that's trying to get debt capital. It's really important to be able to have these vehicles.